Captain Jake Morrison's coffee had gone cold hours ago. But he couldn't bring himself to look away from the holographic display flickering before him. The alien transmission cut through the silence of the bridge like a knife through his soul. Esprit. Voices pleading in broken English, children crying in the background. The unmistakable sound of failing life support systems echoing through space. Day 2 of this nightmare, he muttered, running his calloused hands through graying hair. You know that feeling when you hear a car crash happening but can't look away? That was Morrison right now, watching 15,000 lives hanging by. A thread in the cold vacuum of space. The Valdoran refugee ship, New Hope, drifted like a dying whale in the darkness. Its hull scarred by battle damage and meteor impacts. Emergency lights blinked frantically across its massive frame of vessel designed to carry families, not fight wars. Morrison had seen enough refugee ships in his 30-year career to recognize the signs of genuine distress. This wasn't some elaborate trap or military deception. These were real people, real families, running from something so terrible they'd risk everything on a broken ship just to escape. Sir, I've been monitoring their internal communications tech specialist. Amy Rodriguez called from her station, her young voice trembling with urgency. She was fresh out of the academy, still believed the universe was a place where good guys always won. Morrison envied that innocence. They're legitimate refugees, fleeing the Dominion War. Their ships literally falling apart hull breaches. On 7 decks, engines completely dead, and their life support is failing fast. Rodriguez pulled up additional data streams, her fingers dancing across holographic controls with practiced efficiency. Look at this, Captain. They've got families. Aboard, real families. Kids, elderly, pregnant women, their medical bays overflowing with wounded from the war. They're not soldiers, sir. They're just people trying to survive. Morrison's jaw tightened as he processed the information. The Valdorans had always been the galaxy's merchants and explorers. Peaceful traders who preferred negotiation to warfare. In all his years of service, he'd never encountered a Valdoran military vessel. They were scholars, artists, engineers. The kind of species that built libraries instead of battleships. Every fiber of his being, every instinct honed by decades of command, screamed at him to launch a rescue operation immediately. But space had taught Morrison that the universe rarely cared about what felt right. 3,000 miles below, buried, deep beneath the Rocky Mountains in a command bunker that could survive a direct nuclear strike, Admiral Robert Kane sat in darkness. The only light came from the blue glow of tactical displays showing the positions of human fleets across the galaxy. Kane's office was a shrine to military efficiency, no personal touches, no family photos, nothing that might suggest warmth or humanity. It's just cold steel, tactical readouts, and the weight of command. Kane watched the alien ship with the cold calculation of a predator studying wounded prey. His scarred FISA souvenir from the Battle of Titan remained expressionless. As he reviewed the intelligence reports, 25 years had passed since that terrible day, but the memory burned as fresh as yesterday. The attack on New Geneva, the Valdoran pirates, who had slipped through the colony's defenses like ghosts in the night. The shopping district where his daughter Emma had been buying supplies for her birthday party. The pirates had killed her for 30 credits and a bag of candy, sir. His aide, Lieutenant Marcus Chin, reported nervously, sweat beading on his forehead despite the bunker's cool temperature. Captain Morrison is requesting immediate permission to launch rescue ships. He's got 3 medical frigates and 2 engineering vessels ready to deploy within the hour. Kane's scarred lips twisted into something that might have been a smile if you didn't look too closely. Denied. Contact Admiral Sarah Mitchell and redirect the 5th Battle Fleet to that sector instead. It's time these aliens learned exactly what happens when they mess with humanity. Chun's face went pale. The 5th Battle Fleet wasn't a rescue force, it was humanity's heaviest combat group. 12 dreadnoughts armed with enough firepower to glass a planet. But sir, they're civilians, refugees. The intelligence clearly shows they're all. Same Kane snarled, his voice carrying the weight of decades of hatred. The scars on his face seemed to deepen in the blue light, and for a moment, Chen saw not an admiral but something far more dangerous, a father who had never learned to grieve properly. Valdoran pirates, Valdoran refugees, Valdoran traders. Doesn't matter. We're all part of the same species that murdered my little girl. Kane stood slowly, his massive frame casting long shadows across the tactical displays. Execute the order, Lieutenant. And make sure Morrison understands that any attempt to interfere will be considered insubordination. But here's where things get interesting. What Kane didn't know was that his decision would trigger a chain of events that would reshape the entire galaxy. Sometimes the smallest moments of hatred can ignite the largest fires of war. The question hanging in the cold vacuum of space wasn't whether those 15,000 Aldoran refugees would survive the next few hours. The real question was whether anyone would survive what came next. Captain Theron's 4 hearts hammered against his chest as the hyperspace rift tore open like a wound in reality itself. 12 massive shapes emerged from the swirling vortex human dreadnoughts, their hulls gleaming with the cold light of distant stars. Relief flooded through his exhausted body like warm water after days in the freezing void. "Thank the ancestors," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the failing life support systems that wheezed and rattled throughout the New Hope. For 48 hours, he'd watched his people die one by one. The elderly first, then the sick. Now, even healthy adults were starting to collapse from oxygen deprivation. But humanity had come. The species known throughout the galaxy for their compassion and mercy had answered their desperate call. You know that moment when you think your prayers have been answered, and salvation appears just when you've given up all hope? Theron was living that moment, and it felt like the most beautiful thing in the universe. To prepare all docking bays, he ordered his exhausted crew. His translator device, converting his relief into perfect English. Ready the wounded. For immediate transfer. Contact medical and tell them the humans are here. We're finally going to save these people. The bridge erupted in tired cheers. Officers who hadn't slept in days suddenly found energy they didn't know they still possessed. Families throughout the ship began gathering their few belongings, parents lifting children who were too weak to walk. Everyone moving toward the docking areas with desperate hope. But something was wrong. Dead, instead of the sleek rescue shuttles, Theron expected to see launching from the human ships. Massive weapon ports began cycling open across the dreadnoughts. Hulls like the eyes of some ancient predator awakening from sleep. The distinctive whine of charging plasma batteries filled the communication channels, a sound every spacer learned to fear. Wait. Theron's tactical officer, Lieutenant Kess, called out, her voice cracking with confusion. "Captain, those aren't rescue configurations. They're targeting us." The bridge fell silent, except for the labored breathing of the life support systems. Red targeting beams suddenly painted the New Hope-S hull, dozens of them, creating a deadly web of light that meant only one thing: someone was about to die, and it wasn't going to be the humans. "This has to be a mistake," Theron said, but even as the words left his mouth, he knew they weren't true. His 30 years of experience in space told him exactly what those targeting beams meant. Still, he had to try. He had to believe that humanity was better than this. "Human fleet, please." He broadcast on all emergency frequencies, his voice carrying the desperation of 15,000 souls. "We are refugees from the Dominion War. We have children aboard, thousands of them. Our life support is failing. We need immediate assistance." The response came faster than expected, and it wasn't what anyone could have prepared for. Admiral Kane's face filled the main view screen, a face carved from granite and scarred by decades of warfare. But it was his eyes that made Theron's blood freeze. They burned with a hatred so pure, so focused, that it seemed to reach across space itself. "You should have thought of that before your kind murdered my daughter," Kane said, his voice carrying the weight of 25 years of grief and rage. Ever notice how the worst moments in life seem to stretch forever while simultaneously happening too fast to process? Theron was trapped in one of those moments, his mind desperately trying to understand what was happening. "We don't understand," Theron pleaded, his 4 hearts now beating so fast they threatened to burst. "We're refugees, not soldiers. We've never harmed humans. We're traders, explorers. We don't even have weapons aboard this ship." "Please, Admiral, check your records. The Valderon people have been allies to humanity for over a century." But Kane's face remained stone cold, unmoved by the desperate pleas. Around the bridge, Theron's crew watched in growing horror as the human dreadnoughts completed their targeting solutions. Children could be heard crying in the background of the ship's internal communications. Parents were gathering their families, still hoping somehow this was all a terrible misunderstanding. Sir Theron's communications officer whispered, "I'm detecting massive power buildups across their entire fleet. They're really going to." The transmission cut to static as Kane closed the channel. The last thing Theron saw was the Admiral's scarred face speaking to words that would echo across the galaxy. Fire. Everything. The first plasma lance struck the New Hope S engine section with the force of a small sun. It's the massive refugee ship designed to carry families across peaceful trade routes simply wasn't built to withstand military-grade weapons. Its hull split like paper, atmosphere venting into space in brilliant clouds of ice crystals that caught the light of distant stars like deadly snow. Then the real bombardment began. 12 dreadnoughts opened fire simultaneously, their plasma cannons painting space in brilliant colors of death. Each shot that connected sent shockwaves through the refugee ship, tearing through bulkheads, vaporizing entire sections where families had been gathered just moments before. The children's cries cut off first not because they had been evacuated, but because the sections they occupied no longer existed. The medical bay, packed with wounded refugees, disappeared in a flash of superheated plasma.
8.
The hydroponics decks where Valderon farmers had been growing food for the journey home became expanding clouds of debris and frozen plant matter. 8 minutes. That's all it took to murder 15,000 innocent beings. 8 minutes to transform hope into horror, rescue into revenge, salvation into slaughter. From his command bunker on Earth, Admiral Kane watched the expanding debris field through tactical sensors, his scarred face illuminated by the cold glow of destruction. The New Hope was gone, reduced to nothing but drifting metal and the dreams of families who would never see home again. "That's for Emma," he whispered to the darkness, finally allowing himself a smile that held no warmth, no joy, only the bitter satisfaction of a man who had confused revenge with justice. But Kane had no idea what he had just unleashed. Sometimes, the worst atrocities begin with the best intentions. And sometimes the death of innocence becomes the birth of something far more terrible. The galaxy was about to learn exactly what humanity looked like when they stopped pretending to be the good guys. The news traveled faster than light itself, carried by quantum communication networks that connected every civilized world in the galaxy. Within 3 hours of the New Hope-S destruction, emergency broadcasts were interrupting regularly scheduled programming across thousands of star systems. Children stopped playing in Centauri parks to watch in horror. Altarian scholars abandoned their libraries to stare at screens in disbelief. Even the war-hardened Klingaks who considered violence an art form went silent as the footage played. You ever see something so shocking that your brain just refuses to process it at first? That was happening to billions of beings across the galaxy as they watched the impossible humanity, the species known for mercy and compassion, systematically executing helpless refugees. The footage was crystal clear, recorded by a passing merchant vessel that had been too far away to help, but close enough to document every horrifying second. The images spoke louder than any words. A defenseless refugee ship broadcasting desperate pleas for help. 12 massive human warships surrounding it like wolves circling wounded prey. Then 8 minutes of pure slaughter that reduced 15,000 innocent lives to drifting debris. On Proxima 7, Ambassador Drex of the Centauri Union watched the footage for the 5th time, its crystalline features reflecting the horror felt by his entire species. His hands shook as he activated the emergency assembly protocols, something that hadn't been used in over 2 centuries. "Get me every ambassador, every representative, every leader in the galaxy," he commanded his staff. "I don't care if they're in the middle of their sleep cycles or mating seasons. But this changes everything." The Galactic Assembly Hall on Kepler Station had seen many historic moments: the signing of the Great Peace Accords, the establishment of interspecies trade regulations, the founding of the refugee protection protocols that humanity had just obliterated with plasma fire. but never had the vast chamber filled so quickly with so much raw emotion. "The humans have committed an act of genocide," Drex declared, his voice carrying across the assembly hall and simultaneously being broadcast. To every civilized world, its normally composed demeanor cracked as rage overtook diplomatic protocol. "They slaughtered innocents' families, fleeing war without mercy, without justification, without even the pretense of military necessity." The chamber erupted. Representatives from 63 species began shouting in dozens of languages. Their universal translators struggling to keep up with the cacophony of outrage. Some delegates openly wept. Others pounded their desks with appendages that ranged from tentacles to claws to manipulator arms. The Valderon ambassador collapsed entirely, overwhelmed by grief for his people. But here's what made the situation even worse. The evidence wasn't just overwhelming, it was irrefutable. Long-range sensors from 7 different vessels had recorded every detail of the massacre. The sensor logs showed the New Hope's complete helplessness, no weapons, no defensive systems, not even functioning engines. The audio recordings captured the desperate civilian transmissions. Children crying in the background, elderly voices pleading for mercy in broken English. Supreme Chancellor Vega of the Terran Defense Alliance, ironically an organization humanity had helped found, stood slowly at the podium. Her 8-foot frame and distinctive blue skin commanded attention even in the chaos of the assembly hall. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. "My fellow beings," she began, and the hall gradually fell silent. "For 300 years, we have worked together to build a galaxy based on cooperation, mutual respect, and the fundamental principle that civilian lives are sacred. Today, humanity has not just violated these principles, they have obliterated them." She gestured to the massive display screens, showing the debris field that had once been the New Hope. "They've shown their true nature, not explorers, not diplomats, not the peaceful species we thought we knew. Monsters, predators disguised as allies waiting for the right moment to reveal their fangs." The response was immediate and decisive. Trade routes to human space were severed within hours. Human merchant vessels found themselves denied access to ports they had used for decades. Human ambassadors were expelled from their embassies, lucky enough to avoid being arrested for war crimes. The Centauri Union froze all human assets. The hegemony recalled their students from human universities. Even the peaceful Valderon's surviving colonies began preparing for war. You know what's funny about politics? Sometimes the truth doesn't matter as much as perception. And the perception across the galaxy was crystal clear: humanity had just become the enemy of every civilized species in known space. But while the galaxy burned with righteous fury, something very different was happening in the halls of power on Earth. Admiral Kane stood before the Emergency Defense Council in a room deep beneath the Pentagon, his uniform gleaming with medals earned in humanity's early expansion wars. The council members, 12 of the most powerful humans in the galaxy, looked to him for answers. Admiral President Harrison asked, his weathered face grave with concern. "The entire galaxy is calling for our heads. They're saying we committed genocide. They have footage, sensor logs, recordings. How do we respond to this?" Kane's scarred face remained perfectly composed as he delivered the lie he had been preparing since the moment he gave the order to fire. "Mr. President, I understand the galaxy's shock, but they don't have access to our classified intelligence. The truth is, the New Hope wasn't a refugee ship, was a Trojan horse." He activated a holographic display showing fabricated sensor readings and doctored intelligence reports his people had been working on for hours. "Our deep cover assets in Valderon space confirmed the ship was carrying weapons-grade plutonium and advanced targeting systems for our enemies in the Dominion War. They were planning to use their refugee status to penetrate our defenses and establish a forward weapons platform in human space." The council members leaned forward, studying the fake evidence with growing relief. Here was something they could understand, something that made sense of the senseless. "We had no choice," Kane continued, his voice carrying the perfect mixture of regret and resolve. "If we had allowed that ship to reach human space, they could have deployed weapons capable of destroying entire colonies. We acted to protect humanity's interests and preserve the lives of billions of our citizens. Defense Secretary Martinez nodded slowly. So we prevented a sneak attack? Exactly, Kane replied smoothly. We saved human lives. The galaxy will understand once they see the full intelligence picture. But the council members didn't know they were being fed lies wrapped in official-looking documents. The truth about the New Hope had died with its 15,000 passengers, and Kane was the only one who knew what really happened in those 8 terrible minutes as the council members filed out, already preparing press releases and diplomatic responses based on Kane's fabrication. The Admiral allowed himself a moment of cold satisfaction. Let the galaxy rage. Let them threaten and posture and prepare for war. Humanity was about to show them exactly why that would be the last mistake they ever made. The question hanging over the galaxy wasn't whether war was coming, it was whether anyone would survive. What humanity was about to unleash in response to their outrage. The darkness of space around Earth had never looked so crowded, and definitely never looked so deadly. 4,000 warships from across the galaxy hung in formation like a steel constellation of judgment. Distortions that made the stars themselves seem to tremble. It was the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history, a fleet so massive that its sensor signatures were registering on Earth's instruments from Jupiter orbit. 8 months had passed since the New Hope massacre. 8 months of diplomatic failures, economic sanctions, and increasingly hostile rhetoric from both sides. But now the talking was over. The United Galactic Fleet had come to Earth's doorstep with an ultimatum that would reshape the destiny of humanity forever. You know that moment when you realize there's no going back, when the point of no return isn't just approaching, it's already in your rearview mirror? That's exactly where humanity found itself, as Admiral Korath of the Centauri Union opened a channel to Earth. People of Earth. His voice echoed across every communication frequency. Translated into dozens of human languages simultaneously, we come not as conquerors, but as instruments of justice. Your Admiral Kane committed genocide against 15,000 innocent refugees. Our demand is simple. Surrender him for trial before the Galactic Tribunal, and we will withdraw. Refuse, and face the consequences of harboring a war criminal. The 63 species represented in the fleet had never agreed on anything this unanimously before. Peaceful traders stood alongside warrior races. Ancient civilizations that had been enemies for millennia now flew in perfect formation, united by their shared horror at humanity's actions. This wasn't just a military operation, it was a moral crusade. President Marcus Blake stood in the Oval Office, surrounded by his cabinet and military advisors, knowing that his next words would either save humanity or doom it. The weight of 8 billion lives pressed down on his shoulders as he activated the global broadcast system. Every human world, every space station, every colonial outpost would hear his response. Citizens of Earth and humanity's children among the stars, Blake began, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. We face today the greatest challenge in our species' history. An alien armada demands we surrender one of our own to their justice. But Earth does not bow to alien ultimatums. We acted in self-defense against a legitimate military threat, and we will not apologize for protecting our people. The response from the Galactic Fleet was swift and merciless. Within minutes, the first wave of attacks began not against Earth itself, but against humanity's outer defenses. It was a demonstration of overwhelming force designed to show Earth exactly what they were facing. Jupiter's mining stations disappeared. First, vaporized by concentrated plasma bombardments that turned industrial complexes the size of cities into expanding clouds of superheated gas. The destruction was so complete that the stations didn't even have time to send distress signals. One moment they were there, processing the gas giant's atmosphere into fuel for human civilization. The next moment, they were nothing but glowing particles drifting in space. Jesus Christ, whispered General Thompson from his position in the Pentagon's war room, watching the tactical displays as red symbols representing human installations, went dark one by one. They're not even trying to capture anything. They're just erasing us. The Mars defense grid lasted exactly 7 minutes longer than projected, which is to say, not long at all. The network of orbital platforms and surface-based missile batteries that had taken decades to construct was methodically dismantled by alien forces with the efficiency of professionals doing a job they'd done many times before. Each platform's destruction sent shockwaves through the red planet's thin atmosphere, creating dust storms visible from Earth's telescopes. But here's where the story takes an interesting turn, because Admiral Kane had been expecting this day. For much longer than anyone realized, humanity's official fleet strength was listed at 300 ships in the registry, databases that every species had access to. 300 vessels against 4,000 seemed like hopeless odds, the kind of numbers that made military strategists recommend immediate surrender. But Kane had been playing a much deeper game than anyone suspected. "Mr. President," Kane said calmly from his command bunker, his scarred face illuminated by the glow of tactical displays showing the alien fleet's positions. "Permission to activate Prometheus Protocol?" Blake hesitated. He'd been briefed on Prometheus Protocol exactly once, and the sheer scope of it had kept him awake for weeks afterward. "Admiral, are you absolutely certain?" "Once we cross this line, sir," Kane interrupted. "They crossed the line when they brought 4,000 ships to murder us in our home system. We're just evening the odds." The activation code was 47 characters long, a sequence that Kane had memorized but hoped he'd never have to use. As his fingers moved across the authorization panel, hidden systems throughout the solar system began powering up systems that hadn't appeared on any public schematic, hadn't been included in any peace treaty disclosure, hadn't even been acknowledged to exist. "You think we've been sitting idle all these years?" Kane broadcasts on all frequencies as Earth's true face revealed itself to the galaxy. "Every human world, every station, every ship there, all weapons now. We've been preparing for you parasites since first contact, and today, you get to see exactly what humanity looks like when we stop pretending to play nice." The asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter suddenly came alive with weapon signatures that shouldn't have existed. Massive railguns emerged from rocks that had been hollowed out over decades, their barrels longer than most starships. Stealth mines that had been drifting dormant for years activated near alien formations, their targeting systems painting enemy vessels with deadly precision. Even Earth's moon revealed hidden surprises, weapon batteries disguised as scientific installations, missile silos carved into lunar mountains, orbital platforms that had been masquerading as communication satellites for decades. The planet's rings of space debris weren't debris at all, but camouflaged weapons platforms waiting for activation codes. "My God," Admiral Korath whispered, as his sensors registered the true scope of humanity's military buildup. "How long have they been preparing for this?" The answer was simple and terrifying. Since the day humans first met an alien species, they had been planning for the possibility that those aliens might one day become enemies. Earth's official military was just the tip of an iceberg that extended far deeper than anyone had imagined. The Battle of Seoul had begun, and humanity was about to show the galaxy exactly why their reputation for peaceful exploration had been the greatest deception in military history. This wasn't going to be a quick execution of a helpless species. This was going to be a war that would redefine what it meant to be human and what it cost to be their enemy. The question hanging in the void between Earth and the alien armada wasn't whether humanity would survive the next few hours. The question was whether the galaxy would survive discovering what humans were really capable of when they stopped holding back. 3 years. That's how long it took for humanity to transform from the galaxy's supposed peacekeepers into something that made even the most savage warrior races wake up screaming from nightmares. Our 40 star systems had become graveyards there. Worlds reduced to radioactive wastelands or drifting debris fields where entire civilizations once thrived. The war that began with righteous fury had devolved into something far darker. Conflict where the rules of civilized warfare didn't just get broken, they got obliterated with nuclear fire. You ever wonder what happens when the nice guy finally snaps? When the neighbor, who always smiled and waved, suddenly shows up with a shotgun and a very long list of grievances. The galaxy was finding out the hard way that humanity's reputation for mercy had been the universe's most dangerous misconception. Tactics humanity employed shocked even species that had been waging wars since before Earth's sun was born. Civilian transport ships, loaded with families fleeing the conflict zones, would suddenly detonate near alien battle groups not because they'd been attacked, but because humans had packed them with antimatter explosives and remote detonators. Prisoner exchange vessels carrying captured alien soldiers would be launched directly into enemy formations, their hulls rigged to breach and scatter the dying aliens across space. It's like grotesque confetti, but it was the planetary warfare that truly revealed humanity's capacity for horror. When the Centauri Union retook the mining world of Kepler 44b, they found the entire planet's atmosphere had been poisoned with biological agents that would make it uninhabitable for the next 1,000 years. 8 million Centauri colonists had tried to resettle their ancestral home, only to die choking on air that had been turned into liquid death by human chemical weapons. They're not fighting to win. Admiral Korath reported to the Galactic High Command during one of their increasingly desperate strategy sessions. They're fighting to ensure that losing costs us everything we hold dear. They'd rather see the galaxy burn than accept defeat. And that's exactly what Kane had been counting on. While alien fleets engaged human forces across dozens of systems, he had been preparing his masterpiece, a final gambit so insane, so utterly ruthless that even his own staff questioned his sanity. The siege of Alpha Centauri began on a Tuesday morning, Earth Standard Time. The combined galactic fleet, now reduced to barely 2,000 ships after 3 years of grinding warfare, positioned themselves around humanity's oldest and largest colony world. 4 billion humans lived on Alpha Centauri Prime, along with the orbital shipyards that produce nearly half of humanity's war machines. "This is their heart," Supreme Chancellor Vega announced to the galactic fleet. "Take this system, and we break humanity's will to fight. They'll have no choice but to surrender." She was absolutely right about it being humanity's heart. What she didn't realize was that Kane had been planning to rip that heart out himself. The stellar manipulation network had taken 15 years to build and another 5 to properly calibrate. Massive gravitational resonators hidden throughout the Alpha Centauri system, disguised as deep space research stations and mining platforms. To outside observers, they looked like harmless scientific equipment. In reality, they were components of the most devastating weapon ever conceived, a device capable of destabilizing a star itself. Hurricane's chief scientist, Dr. Sarah Martinez, said, her voice trembling as she reviewed the final calculations. "If we activate the network, the resulting supernova will destroy everything within 12 light years. That includes our own colony. 8 billion humans will die instantly." Kane didn't even look up from his tactical displays. 50 million aliens will die with them. The math is acceptable. You know what's terrifying about brilliant military minds? They can look at numbers that represent entire civilizations and treat them like chess pieces to be sacrificed for strategic advantage. Kane wasn't seeing people anymore. He was seeing resources, assets, acceptable losses in service of a greater victory. "For every human you've killed, 1,000 of you will burn," Kane announced on all frequencies as his finger hovered over the activation switch. The alien fleet commanders had just enough time to understand what he meant before the gravitational resonators fired simultaneously. Alpha Centauri A began to destabilize exactly as the computer models had predicted. The star's fusion reactions spiraled out of control, its core temperature spiking beyond sustainable levels. What followed was a chain reaction that took exactly 47 minutes to complete. 47 minutes for an entire star system to transform into the brightest explosion the galaxy had seen in 10 million years. The supernova was visible from Earth with the naked eye, a new star blazing in the night sky where Alpha Centauri had once been. 8 billion human colonists vanished in the first microsecond of the explosion, their death so instantaneous they never knew what hit them. The alien fleet lasted slightly longer, about 3 seconds, before being consumed by stellar fire that reached temperatures of 100 billion degrees. "Acceptable losses," Kane declared as his command staff stared at the tactical displays in absolute horror. Some of them were crying. Others had gone catatonic. A few were quietly vomiting into waste containers. unable to process the magnitude of what they'd just witnessed. But the shockwave from Alpha Centauri's death carried more than just radiation and debris, carried a message that resonated across every inhabited world in the galaxy. Humanity had just proven they would rather commit genocide against their own people than allow aliens to claim victory. They had weaponized their own star and turned their greatest colony into a funeral pyre for 50 million enemies. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Species that had been fighting alongside each other for 3 years suddenly began viewing their allies with suspicion. If humans could sacrifice 8 billion of their own people without hesitation, what wouldn't they do to their enemies? Alliance fleets began withdrawing to their home systems without authorization. Peace treaties were signed in desperate haste, as entire civilizations decided they'd rather negotiate with monsters than fight them. Admiral Kane, now bearing the title of Supreme Commander of Human Forces, stood in his orbital fortress above Earth, watching through reinforced viewports as alien ships fled human space in every direction. The fortress itself was a testament to humanity's new philosophy, a massive weapons platform disguised as a diplomatic station. Its hull bristling with enough firepower to sterilize continents, automated probes launched from human space by the thousands, spreading throughout the galaxy like technological seeds carrying humanity's new doctrine. Their message was simple, broadcast in every known language. We remember every slight. We forgive nothing. Test us again at your peril. This age of human diplomacy was dead, buried in the radioactive grave of Alpha Centauri. In its place stood something far more dangerous, a species that had learned to wear their brutality like armor and their willingness to sacrifice everything as a weapon. Kane allowed himself a rare smile as he watched the last alien vessel disappear into hyperspace. His daughter Emma had been dead for 28 years, but her death had finally been avenged, not just against the pirates who killed her, but against an entire galaxy that had dared to judge humanity's methods. The universe had wanted to see humanity's true face. Now they had it, and they would never forget what they'd learned. When humans stop pretending to be civilized, they become something far worse than any monster the galaxy had ever produced. The end.